This is Find Your Dream Job, the podcast that helps you get hired, have the career you want, and make a difference in life. I'm Mac Pritchard, your host and publisher of Mac's List. On today's show, we're discussing location-independent jobs and how you can become a digital nomad. Our show is brought to you by Mac's List, your best online source for rewarding, creative, and meaningful work. Visit maxlist.org to learn more. You'll find hundreds of great jobs, a blog with practical career advice, and our new book, Land Your Dream Job in Portland and Beyond. So let's turn to our topic this week. Walk into any coffee shop today, and you'll likely see a customer typing out a report or an email on a laptop computer, or perhaps talking on a cell phone about a project or a business deal. These are probably telecommuters, people who have full-time professional jobs, typically with large organizations, but they work outside the office for one or more days a week. In fact, according to the New York Times, as many as 30% of all Americans may telecommute one or more days a week today. What would your life be like if that coffee shop was your workplace? And what if your dream was to never go to an office, instead do the work you enjoy when you want and from anywhere in the world? And not just one day a week, but 5 days a week. Increasing numbers of people are doing exactly this, and they call themselves digital nomads. They live what they call location-independent lives. They travel frequently, and they work remotely, often as freelancers or contractors. According to Wikipedia, digital nomads are people who use telecommunications technologies to perform job duties and conduct their life in a nomadic manner. Even professions you think would be completely location-dependent, such as healthcare, can now be performed remotely. Now, we're going to talk to a digital nomad and an expert on the field, Tamara Murray. And she, for the last 2 years, has worked full-time while traveling the globe. But first, let's check in with the Mac's List team. Joining me, as always, are Ben Forstag, Managing Director of Mac's List, and Cecilia Bianco, Community Manager of Mac's List. Ben, Cecilia, how are you two doing this week?
I'm doing great.
Doing good, Mac.
Great. So, remote working. You both make the trek to downtown Portland, where we have an office in a building that went up before World War I. And in fact, our offices have doors. So they're about as far from remote working as you can get, though now we are moving to working at home on Fridays. But tell me, what do you two think about remote working?
Well, I'm someone who really likes coming into work and having an office and separating the home life from work life. But I do like having the option to work from home when I've got a contractor come to the house or I need to watch my son during the day. Having that flexibility is really nice.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely enjoy having a flexible schedule. And if Comcast is coming one day, I can sit and work at home and wait for them without having a problem. So it's definitely a bonus.
Good. Well, and as an employer, I have to say I see that people who work at home are often more productive. And having that flexibility is something I think that makes not only for an attractive workplace, but makes it easier for employers to hold on to great people. So let's move on to our regular features. Every week, Ben searches the nooks and crannies of the internet, looking for blogs, podcasts, and other tools you can use in your job search. Ben, what have you discovered for us this week?
Well, Mac, since we'll be talking about remote working and telecommuting this week, I thought I'd find some resources for people who want to explore these options for work. So today I've got 2 blogs I want to share with our listeners. The first, number 1, is the Flex Jobs blog. That's flexjobs.com/blog. Flex Jobs is a job website that specializes in telecommuting, freelance, part-time, and flexible job opportunities. Have you ever heard of the site, Mac?
It's a new one to me.
Okay. It's, I think, a very kind of niche site for a certain type of jobs. But the one specific post I'd like to steer our audience towards is the 100 top companies with remote jobs in 2015. Flex Jobs keeps track of all this stuff based on the number of job posts from these companies that talk about remote working. And every year they come out with a list of the employers who offer the most flexible remote work opportunities in their organizations. The URL for this blog post is really long, so I'm not going to repeat it here. But if you go to the flexjobs.com website and type in 100 top companies, it will pop up there, and I'll also include a link to this in the show notes.
And for those who are listening, are there any surprises on that list?
Well, there are. So most of these companies are large national or multinational corporations. The companies you'd expect to see, so the Intels, the Apples, the Amazons, organizations like that. But there are some companies you might not expect. For example, there's some government agencies there that are listed as being particularly open to flex working. The Department of Transportation, Department of Agriculture, Department of Interior. There's some nonprofits as well, Teach for America and the American Heart Association. And the interesting thing here is, according to their research, they've seen a 26% increase in the number of remote jobs over last year. So this is becoming an increasingly common thing for employers to offer. And the areas where they see the biggest growth is not in the technology side, where you might expect, but in the fields of medical and healthcare, sales, administrative services, education, and marketing. So this is a growing option for many different industries.
Coincidentally, I had lunch with someone last week who is an Oregonian and just moved back to Portland. He works for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, which is a huge organization. And he was able to bring his job with him because he's now working remotely from Portland, doing national work for the federal government. And I was surprised that an organization that large would be open to that idea. And in fact, it's a pilot project, but I think it's a sign of a trend that is not only popular, but is growing.
Especially an organization as large and as racked with inertia as the federal government.
Yeah, things do move slowly in the federal government.
So the second blog I wanted to talk about today is called the Life Listed blog. It's lifelisted.com. And this one is really cool. It's written by a guy named Danny Dover. And he was an entrepreneur who did the startup get-rich thing, but then decided that instead of optimizing profits, he really wanted to optimize his own personal happiness. So he started traveling the world and working remotely to check items off of his bucket list. The Life Listed blog shares strategies and actionable items on how to complete your own purposeful life list. Again, what we might call a bucket list. Since working is typically a part of life, or at least a necessary activity to fund other adventures, much of the site is dedicated to how to work remotely. I particularly suggest a blog post they have on the best tools for working remotely. This lists a bunch of different hardware, software, and services that are really useful for digital nomads. The interesting thing about this post is I think even if you work in an office, there's some tools there that you might find really valuable to work more efficiently, more happy, and just do a better job with your work, whether you work in an office or in the coffee shop. Again, that's the Life Listed blog. It's lifelisted.com/blog. And as always, we'll have links to these resources in the show notes.
Great. Thanks, Ben. And I know that when we speak with Tamara, she's going to tell us about what life is like working full-time while traveling overseas or through the United States. But I'm getting from your conversation that many of the tools that you've just described could work for people who simply want to work from their home in the same town as their employer.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, terrific. Thank you. If you have a suggestion for Ben, please write him, and we may share your idea on the show. Ben's email address is ben@maxlist.org. Now it's time to turn to Cecilia Bianco, our community manager, and she always has her ear to the ground, wanting to know what you, our listeners, think. And every week she brings us one of your questions. Cecilia, what do you have for us this week?
Thanks, Mac. Our question this week is, how should I address a travel sabbatical or a year abroad to a potential employer? And I think the best way to address time abroad is to demonstrate the skills you gained while traveling and how they might add to your professional value. We actually had a guest contributor write a blog post about travel sabbaticals, and she gave some really clear examples on how to do this. So her and her husband traveled for over a year to several different countries, and her husband was an accountant and managed the bookkeeping throughout their trip. This is obviously not a small task when the currency is changing every couple of weeks, and he was able to show how his sabbatical improved the skill set he needed in his field because he did this. And similarly, she was an urban planner. She still is an urban planner. So she did research in advance and made plans to visit planning and development organizations while they were traveling. So then when she came back and talked to potential employers in interviews, she had a lot to say about what she learned about her field while abroad. So overall, I think it's the most important thing to do is think about what you did on your trip that will improve your hireability to an employer based on the field you're in. Mac, I know you and Chris, your wife, go on trips abroad almost every year. Do you have any suggestions for ways to show the benefit of time abroad?
Well, a number come to mind, and I think many employers are impressed by people who regularly travel overseas because I think it indicates that they're open to new experiences, new ideas, and I think even if you're taking a short trip, it could be a vacation of 2 or 3 weeks, there's benefit to you as a job candidate or to your employer by taking advantage of that opportunity to show that you are looking for new experiences. So simply listing on your LinkedIn profile or your resume some of the foreign trips you might have taken, while a small step can be an important one. For people like the couple you were talking about who are spending several months or a year or more overseas, they have an opportunity to document what they've done. Whether it's volunteer or paid work, that's a valuable experience. And being specific about how it relates to the work that you do or you want to do will always pay dividends for you as a job applicant.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Ben, do you have any suggestions?
Well, I've taken a lot of international trips, and I've never had a trip that goes off without a hitch. There's always a reservation that falls through, or you miss the train, or something else awful happens.
Right.
And so I think international travel can often be framed as an exercise in flexibility and responsiveness and emergency management, and those are skills that I think any employer would be interested in.
Yeah, definitely. So those are great suggestions. And if you're planning a trip or considering taking a year to travel, there's things you can do to make sure that this is supporting your resume. So you could start a blog about your trip or network while you're abroad, like our blog post contributor did. So look for opportunities to meet colleagues in your field and maybe even set up some informational interviews if you can.
Terrific. Thank you, Cecilia. If you have a question for Cecilia, her email address is cecilia@maxlist.org, and she would love to hear from you. Now, these segments by Ben and Cecilia are sponsored by the Max List Guides, publisher of our new book, Land Your Dream Job in Portland and Beyond. The Max List Guides give you the tools you need to get the job you want. We reveal all of our secrets there, showing you how to crack the hidden job market, stand out in a competitive field, and how to manage your career. The book has 8 chapters, and in each of them, experts share secrets like how to hear about jobs that are never posted and what you can do to interview and negotiate like a pro. To download the first chapter for free, visit maxlist.org/maxlistguides. Now I'm pleased to introduce our guest expert for the week, Tamara Murray. She's going to be sharing her insights on becoming a digital nomad. Before we get started, let me tell you about Tamara. She's a social change communications consultant and lifestyle design geek. And she spent the last decade helping social change nonprofits get their message out, becoming a vice president at a communications agency before age 30. And it was her dream career until 9 to 5 Blues, a TED Talk, and a conversation with her financial planner sent her on a different course. These days, Tamara and her husband Chris are digital nomads. They freelance while they travel North America full-time in a minivan turned camper that they've named Red Delicious. Tamara began experimenting with remote work while on sabbatical in Latin America, where she conducted conference calls via Skype in the jungles of Costa Rica. She's the author of Awesome Supervisory Skills, 7 Lessons for Young First-Time Managers, and she blogs regularly about career breaks, the digital nomad life, and inspiring individuals to help give others to take the courage to take a leap. Thank you for joining us, Tamara.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, great. Well, let's hear your story. And what inspired you to travel and work remotely? What was your aha moment?
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, actually, when you were sharing my bio, I watched a TED Talk a while back by a gentleman who runs a design studio in New York City. And one of the fascinating things that they do is every 7 years, they close the studio for 1 year. So it's really funny. There's an email autoresponder that says, thanks for emailing. We're closed for the rest of the year, but we'll get back to you next year. It's very funny. But he talks about just how time off is really important, and how especially people who work in creative professions can really benefit from taking a breather, getting exposed to new ideas. And I thought, gosh, could I make that happen for me?
So a lot of people have that thought, and they ask themselves that question. What did you do next, and how did you do it?
Yeah, so my path is a little bit unique in that my husband and I, well, we first started just by talking about it with each other, right? Which is something important for anyone who's considering doing this to do, is to talk to the people in your life about this and make sure you're all on the same page. So we both talked about it. We were both feeling the same way. And we did something a little different, which is that we actually just fully took the plunge and actually quit our jobs entirely to go on sabbatical and try and figure out how we could rebuild our lives in a way that offered more flexibility while still being able to earn an income.
So when you made that leap, the idea wasn't to travel full time. You thought you would take a year off and then return to full-time work.
That's right. We did think that that was a possibility, although one of the things we really worked to do during our time was to figure out, hey, how can we make this sustainable? How can we travel full time in a financially sustainable way over the longer term?
And is that something you learned along the way, or did you put some time into doing homework, talking to others, reading books? How did you prepare for that, Tamara?
Yeah, so definitely did a lot of reading. There are a couple of folks that I would definitely suggest that your listeners look into. The first person, her name is Nora Dunn, and she has a great website called The Professional Hobo. And she has a lot of great advice. There's another gentleman named Matt, Nomadic Matt is what he goes by. And they both have a lot of tips about how to travel in a financially sustainable way. So doing a lot of research, knowing that other people have already done this and have ideas you can learn from that's a really important place to start.
What are some of the misconceptions that you've run across both during your preparation for hitting the road and since you've been doing this full time? For example, is there a common type of person who's a digital nomad?
Yes, well, there are a few misconceptions out there. A lot of people think that digital nomads are, these young millennial dudes who are, full-time coders. They're coding from their laptops on a beach in Thailand while they backpack, and go from hostel to hostel. Those people do exist, but there are lots of different types of travel, and there are lots of different types of work. Another common misconception is that you have to be rich to do this, and nothing is further from the truth. In fact, I am making probably about half of what I used to earn, but by reorienting the way that I live my life, the way me and my husband live our lives, we are having a much richer experience. So those are a couple of things that a lot of people think immediately, but are actually pretty far from the truth.
Yeah. In many ways, when I talk to people about this, about digital nomads, and traveling full time, I think the original nomads were full-time RVers. I have an older uncle and aunt who spent 15 years living in an RV, driving around the country, and also going to Mexico and occasionally parking the RV and going to Asia and other places overseas. Now, they weren't working, but they were part of an extended community of what are called full-timers among RVers. And so it's not in many ways an original idea or a new one. It's something that's been going on for decades in America, and obviously some people have been on the road forever.
That's absolutely right. And the way that work is changing, especially because of how widely available Wi-Fi is, and especially how widely available it is now abroad, it is much more feasible now for people to do work from pretty much anywhere they have an internet connection. Now, I will say that, that is fairly limited to knowledge jobs, right? Like it's tougher to be, say, a coffee barista traveling from place to place, just because it requires a brick and mortar establishment for you to be at. Although, if you wanted to get really creative, right, you could imagine someone with an RV who makes a really amazing cappuccino going from place to place. But for the most part, it does tend to be folks in the knowledge fields, whether they're doing consulting or some kind of tech work, coding, graphic design, freelance writers, photographers, and so on.
Now, I know you do consulting with people who are considering taking a sabbatical. What's the most common question you get, Tamara? And again, is there a typical kind of person that you hear from, or is there a variety?
I hear from folks from all different walks of life who are interested in doing this. And there are a few topics that come up. One is just, how do I find a location independent job? That's a really important first start. And there are really two ways to do this. The first is to look for employment, right? To find a job with an employer where it does not matter where you are. The second route is to go the more entrepreneurial route, which is to either become a freelancer or to start your own business. And it's hard to say exactly which route is best. It really depends on things like your industry and your skills. But I'll share one example that's close to home. It's about my husband. He has a background in accounting. He used to work in city government as a budget analyst, something that you would not imagine being able to do from anywhere, right?
Yeah.
You need to be employed in one place.
Right.
And so one of the things he really asked himself is, what do I know how to do? What are my skills that could be transferable to a location independent job? And so really, when you look at what a budget analyst does, what an accountant does, the reason why he was drawn to it is because what he really loves doing is analysis and taking a look at data and looking at trends, right? That's really what his skill set is when you break it down to its bare parts. And so for him, he's like, okay, what types of careers that are location independent where is the connection there? And that's how he got into search engine optimization, which he now does on a consulting basis. He also, as part of this, we've surrounded ourselves with other people who are trying to do this. And he learned about how to set up stores and sell products on Amazon, which is also very reliant on doing research. So he was able to take a skill that worked in one career and transfer it to a location-independent career.
Okay. So people who are considering this should do an inventory of their skills and think about either what might be directly sellable to employers or transferable to other jobs or projects that might be on demand and can be done remotely.
That's right.
Okay. Now, I over the years, I've met a number of people who have done what you and your husband Chris have done, going on the road. And what's impressed me has been the variety. There's a fellow that I met with recently who has just returned from a sabbatical in Argentina, and he and his wife and their two grade school age children moved to Cordoba for a year. And they didn't have jobs, but they lined up volunteer experiences and volunteer opportunities rather, and their goal was to, as a family, have an experience overseas and master Spanish. What would you say to people who might think, well, I'm too old for this, or I can't take the kids, or in your instance, I know that you and your husband traveled with your dog Holly for some time as well.
Yeah, so we actually traveled for a year and a half with our dog Holly, and that surprised a lot of people. And the thing that I'll say is it's possible to travel either on a sabbatical or while you're working in a number of different scenarios. The barriers that you might think of, whether it's we've got kids, we've got a mortgage, we've got a dog, those things are not the barriers that you might think they are. They just require a little bit more planning. For instance, when we were traveling with our dog, we had to plan anytime we were going to cross international borders. We had to look into the paperwork requirements. Folks who are traveling with kids, there are people already all over the world who take their kids on sailing trips for years at a time, and there are options for educating them while on the road. Things like a mortgage. My husband and I have a mortgage, and we rent out our home while we're gone. I know another couple that while they travel, they actually have a duplex, and what they do is they rent one of the units out to a full-time tenant and use the other unit that they rent out via Airbnb so that they can earn an income from it while they're gone, but they also have a place to stay when they're back in town. So there's a lot of options.
Yeah.
So don't think that those challenges are insurmountable. They
Right.
just require a little more planning.
And some of those barriers, like a house, or might actually be an opportunity for raising a new source of income.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, we're coming to the end of our interview in a few minutes. Are there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners, Tamara?
I think there's a lot of logistics involved in becoming a digital nomad, right? You have to think about, where am I going to work? How am I going to find workspace and reliable internet access? What is my travel going to look like? What am I going to do with my stuff? But those things are all logistics, and they all have solutions, many of which are a lot easier than someone might think. One of the things I find, though, that is the bigger challenge is the risk taking, that it is scary to do this. And I can completely understand. I felt the exact same way. But one of the things that someone once told me that I will share with everyone listening today is that, you have to be willing to take a chance and get outside of your comfort zone. And at the worst, if you try this and it's not working, it's too hard, it's not making you happy the way that you wanted it to, you can always go back to your old life or the industry that you were in, where you are going back to an office every day. You already know how to do that, and you can do it again if you need to. But challenge yourself to try something that you don't know how to do, because that's where the growth really happens.
Great. Well, thank you, Tamara. How can people find you online?
You can find me online at helloimtamara.com. And there, folks can find, I interview other digital nomads and have travel advice there. So I encourage folks to go there for any advice.
Well, thank you. That's Tamara Murray, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Mac.
Well, we're back with Cecilia and Ben, and we had some great insights from Tamara about how to be a digital nomad and what life on the road is like while working full time. What did you two think?
I thought she had some great tips, and the thing that stuck with me the most is that she said the biggest problem people face is the risk taking and the fear. And I totally agree with that, because it really is all just logistical. And the harder part is saying, I'm actually going to do this. And it feels like a big risk. So I thought that was her biggest point for me.
I would agree. And I think there are a lot of objections or obstacles to doing this. The big takeaway for me was that if you consider them one at a time, there are solutions. And it may be that those aren't the right solutions for you as an individual thinking about this, but what she has seen, and not only in her own experience, but in the people that she meets on the road, there are others who have not only done this, but are leading a thriving personal and professional life on the road.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I'll be honest, it's one of these things that I wish I had the guts to go ahead and do sometimes. But with a wife and a son and a mortgage, it does seem like a real big challenge. But yeah, I really admire the folks who are able to be on the road 365.
Yeah.
I thought she had some great tips about what you can do when you have a mortgage, and she's obviously dealt with it, but her tips felt really doable, like thinking through it myself, like, oh, where would I put my stuff? She just had some really practical knowledge on it. So
where are you going to move to, Cecilia?
nowhere yet, but if I do, I'm definitely going to look at her website and figure it out.
Right. Well, I'm expecting either one of you or both of you to come to me soon with a proposal for a remote office. If you had to pick one place where you would like to live and work from, what would it be? Cecilia, do you have a wish list?
I've always wanted to live in Italy sometime in the very distant future, so probably Italy.
Oh, that would be a wonderful spot. Ben?
I don't know, Iceland maybe.
Oh, Reykjavik.
Yeah, even farther north. I like the big, open, desolate places.
Well, if I had to pick a spot, it would probably be Madrid. I can't think of a better city, and it's just a magical place to be.
I've actually lived in Madrid for 2 years, Mac.
All right. We're going to have to compare notes.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with more tools and tips you can use to find your dream job. In the meantime, visit us at maxlist.org, where you can sign up for our free newsletter with more than 100 new jobs every week. And if you like what you hear on our show, you can help us by leaving a review and a comment and a rating at iTunes. This helps others discover our show, and we appreciate you listening.